Okay, what do we know about the health consequences? This is just a list I've made of what do we know from the research about consequences of stress. Well, first of all, there's very good evidence that work-related stress, and that could apply also to studying, could lead to burnout, or burnout syndrome is the general term. And there's a very good evidence that long-term stress will lead to, or can lead to, an increased risk of cardiovascular diseases. The risks are similar to the increase in risk that you will have when you are a smoker. So stress is just as dangerous as smoking, basically, from a cardiovascular disease point of view. Infectious diseases, we've done a number of studies and done a number of meta-analysis, looked at all the studies, so well-designed studies about looking at stress and susceptibility to, for example, upper respiratory infections, and we find a very strong association. There's no doubt. Accidents, risk of suicide is increased, cognitive impairment, cognitive stress, chronic stress, long-term stress will affect cognition. It can worsen chronic pain, amplify it. It's a risk factor for a number of inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases like psoriasis, for instance, or even multiple sclerosis. You will see that large stressors in people's lives increase the risk of developing these diseases. Infertility is also related to stress. So if you are highly stressed, you're more likely to be infertile. Cancers, there's definitely some research. It's more difficult to really assess the risk, but there is an increasing, there's partial evidence at least. And very exciting also if you're into all the biological processes involved in biological aging, like oxidative stress, telomere shortening, etc. So stress will affect even the cells of the body in various ways, and so that's so there's a lot of issues there. First of all, but an interesting question is that are these associations, are they linear or are they not linear? Let's say, okay, here we have a graph. Let's say we all know that when people are more physically active, they will achieve better health and live longer, right? But is that a linear association? Is it just if the more physically active you are, the longer you live? Probably not. There's probably, you can probably be too physically active. What about stress and health? Well, it's probably also not linear. So what is it? It's probably non-linear. Most associations in biology with living organisms are non-linear. Let me give you some examples. Here's a graph showing what is generally known as hormesis, and it's a phenomenon you will see in biology in general, that a smaller dose of something that's negative is more protective than nothing, but as it increases, then it has more and more negative consequences. So, for instance, radiation. Here we have some data from studies with rats that have been irradiated, and if you say no radiation, set that at 100, and then increase the radiation dose, you will see improved health in the beginning as the dose increases. But as it increases further, there's some optimal point but then it starts going down again, and you will see worsened health and increased mortality, for instance. One example from real life here is alcohol consumption. These are data from 34 studies, a meta-analysis. Everything is put together, the data are pooled, and we can see that not drinking at all is not as good as drinking just a little bit, like half a drink per day for both men and women is associated with a reduced risk of mortality. But as you start drinking more and more and more, then your risk of dying increases. Of course, we're all going to die at some point, but this is a relative risk, of course. So just a little bit of something that's negative is probably positive. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? So can we use that argument when we talk about stress? Well, certainly we can. The same model will apply here, that low levels of stress are probably associated with better health. So better health than no stress at all. But as we increase the stress level, then we'll see increasingly poor health. So the question we should ask ourselves is not, how do I reduce my stress levels to zero? It should be, what is my optimal stress level? Right? So that's the question we should ask ourselves. What is my optimal stress level? Not zero. That's not the point. And we know that from a lot of studies, that if we are not challenged, we won't develop, we won't thrive. We need to be challenged, but not too much and not too little. So we know that from children, we should just sort of challenge ourselves and challenge our relatives and our children just the right amount so that they develop and thrive. Okay. But how does stress affect health? Well, I have talked about that stress will affect the immune system, hormone system, the cardiovascular system. That's fine. And that's we know a lot about these mechanisms. But it's also interesting that stress will also affect our behaviors, our health behaviors. When people are stressed, some people would be more likely to smoke, for instance, or to drink alcohol. What's really interesting is also that stress will affect our nutritional behaviors, like our eating behaviors. Some people will become more prone to eat sort of carbohydrates, sugar, fats, and so forth. Also, we become less physically active, and it affects our sleep. So stress will make us sleep more poorly. And let's look about stress and health on stress and health behaviors. So basically, our brain, our thinking, we have two modes. We have a manual mode and we have an automatic mode. So the automatic mode is really important because that helps us respond quickly in situations where we shouldn't think too long. We should really respond, right? But we also have a manual mode where we can think about things and reflect and so forth. So, but here's an example of a study where students were recruited and they were randomized to two groups. In one group, they were stressed. They were asked to give a talk about the worst sides of their own worst sides, their worst traits, and they were video filmed, and they had an expert panel in white lab coats sitting and taking notes and stuff, and that's known to be stressful to most people. The other group were solving some really easy tasks, so they weren't really stressed. And then everybody thought that, okay, that was the experiment. And they were told, okay, well, thank you very much for participating in our experiment. In a moment, I'll ask you to go down the hall and you can get your credits for being participating in our experiment. Unfortunately, there will be some waiting, but to compensate you, we put up a lot of food down there. You can eat anything you want. And that was a real part of the experiment. So without the students knowing, the researchers were really registering what do the people eat. And it turned out that those people who were stressed, they were more likely to eat all the unhealthy foods, like the sugary, fatty foods. And the non-stressed students were more likely to eat the healthy foods. And why is that? Well, it's because stress reduces or affects our executive function. It makes us less able to step on the brake. So we need our executive function, but that's weakened by stress. And when you have a weakened executive function, then you're more likely to say, oh, shit, I want the cake, right? But if you have an executive function well functioning, you'll tell yourself, nah, that's probably not what I should. I should probably not take the cake, but take the more healthy carrots or whatever, right? So that's an example of how stress can affect our health behaviors. Sleep, I could talk for hours about sleep. We do a lot of sleep research, but it's well documented that work-related stressors, negative life events, that will elicit stress, of course. And when you are stressed, then you'll be thinking about the negative life circumstances. You'll be aroused, and when you are aroused, it will be more difficult to fall asleep. And if you wake up at night, it will be more difficult for you to fall asleep again. So it's more difficult to maintain your sleep during the night. Maybe these stressors will go away, and then maybe people are less stressed about this. But if it has been going on for a while, people will have a new stressor in their life. And what is that? Their sleep problem. So they can't fall asleep, so that is beginning to stress them. So they start to develop maladaptive cognitions about their sleep. They start maybe sleeping during the day. They perhaps go to bed extremely early in order to really make up for lost sleep. And that really perpetuates their sleep problem. And if you have a sleep problem for a longer time, that will affect the immune system. It will increase inflammation. It will increase the risk of depression. It will affect your metabolism in various ways, and that will lead to physical health problems, which in turn again will be a stressor that makes it difficult to sleep. So basically, we'll see sort of a vicious circle where stress and sleep problems perpetuate each other. Also, if you are sleep deprived, you have fewer resources to deal with everyday challenges. So again, you have a vicious circle. Okay, so what do we know about sleep? Here's a large study of 110 Americans and how long they sleep. And here we see how depressed are they, how are their scores on anxiety. So we can see there's a typical nonlinear association. So people who sleep very few hours and many hours have higher scores on stress, on depression and anxiety. So it's not a linear association, it's a nonlinear association. So it's not only bad to sleep very little, but also to sleep too much. And we see that actually with mortality as well, that people who sleep 5 hours or less are much more likely to die than people who sleep 7 hours. But people who sleep 9 hours or more are also more likely to die. And you see this in most studies on on sleep.